Welcome to the Dynamic Leadership Center's live event where I unpack the tenets of dynamic leadership, a leadership model designed specifically for fast-growing small businesses. Today, I'm kicking off a 4-part series on development plans, a core pillar of this approach. Development plans are not just an HR formality or a checklist for performance reviews. They're a strategic tool designed to grow and scale a small business by systematically building capability at all levels. This is the way I talk about it in dynamic leadership. New employees, mid-level leaders, and senior executives. If you look at elite sports teams or military units, you'll see something interesting. Even the most experienced professionals continue to train. Seasoned players still practice daily. Special ops teams in the military, they don't stop drilling. Just because they've mastered the basics doesn't mean they've arrived. They're continuing to hone their craft. Leaders should do the same thing. The same principle applies to business. Growth demands intentional development. However, when many of these best practices were developed, we didn't have the neuroscience that we do today. A key breakthrough that reshapes how we think about skill building and leadership is neuroplasticity. This is the science behind growth. For a layperson, in my opinion, neuroplasticity tells us that the brain we're born with doesn't have to be the brain we die with. For many of us, this challenges what we learned growing up, that intelligence, skills, and abilities are mostly fixed. But today, we know that through deep practice, repetition, and intentional effort, we can rewire our brains to develop new capabilities. Now, deep practice doesn't have to be complicated. It's not just about grinding through hours and hours. It's small, deliberate efforts consistently applied over time. They create major shifts. As leaders, understanding how to design and execute deep practice drills can make all the difference in how effectively we develop our people. The good news is that for easy hurdles, you can see results after just one set. Yes, I'm using set the same way the term set is used in exercise with sets and reps. Deep practice can be thought of like reps, and it doesn't always take a lot of work. That's the beauty of it. Now, big changes need big work. Just like if you were a sports team preparing for a playoff game, they're going to engage in more drills, they're going to do more work. Or when they're adopting a new set of plays, they're going to have to do more work. Or a player arriving at the team, maybe even an experienced player, they're going to have to do more drills to make the plays second nature. And what does this have to do with growing and scaling a business? Many leaders operate with an action-first mindset, which I admire. It's important, but just as important is eliminating the wrong actions. We live in a fast-changing world where uncertainty is the norm. And while trial and error is part of business, we can reduce the number of iterations needed for success by cutting out known non-starters. That too is a skill. The cone of focus, what you say no to, is just as important. To help leaders navigate growth effectively, today I will introduce the cone of focus, a concept rooted in clarity, discipline, and strategic execution. The idea is simple. Imagine a 30-degree cone, 15 degrees on either side of your core direction, and everything inside that cone aligns with your mission, vision, and strategic priorities. Now, of course, that cone gets pretty wide as you move out, so you continue to reset it. Each year, you now reset your cone and look at what's in there. But because you're making decisions directionally, like a plane on its way to a destination is making these minor adjustments along the way, that's what you do as an organization. But you're doing it with clarity and a common view, a common language. Everything outside that cone, no matter how tempting, distracts from growth and should be avoided. This is why I talk about VUCA. We have to be thinking about threats, and we have to be thinking about resistance to opportunities. Instead of reacting to every shiny object or crisis, leaders must define what they won't do before making decisions about what they will pursue. This aligns with the principles from Great by Choice, good to great, and multipliers, ensuring that growth is strategic, methodical, and leverages the full potential of the team. So there's no one-size-fits-all. The research-backed foundations of development plans in this series will integrate research-backed principles from 4 books, Good to Great and Great by Choice, both by Jim Collins, teaching us the hedgehog concept, 20-mile march, and level 5 leadership, all of which reinforce long-term focus over short-term reactionary decisions. Multipliers, that's that book by 𝗬𝗏𝗏, showing that the best leaders amplify the intelligence and capability of those around them rather than diminish it. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, providing a principle-driven framework for leadership and effectiveness. Now, each of these books aligns with what we know about neuroplasticity and leadership development, even though they were written before neuroplasticity was an everyday topic. In fact, I don't think I recall seeing neuroplasticity or neuroscience mentioned in any of those books, but it's 100% aligned, in my view. The brain hasn't changed in 100,000 years, but our understanding of how to develop skills and make decisions has evolved dramatically. And that's what makes this such a great opportunity for us. It takes some of the best research that was done, and now we can marry it with the knowledge and skills to be able to adopt skills quickly and effectively, and we can have those things that have seemed out of reach to us. The most successful businesses don't get whipsawed by external forces. Instead, they stick to their 20-mile march, steady, consistent progress, rather than erratic spurts of effort. That comes from Great by Choice, 20-mile march. Embrace the Stockdale paradox, acknowledging brutal realities while maintaining confidence in the long-term success. That's from Good to Great by Jim Collins. Multiply their people's intelligence, creativity, and leadership potential instead of limiting it. That's from Multipliers, 𝗬𝗏𝗏. Where do we go from here? Development plans are not one size fits all. Every company is different. They have different goals, different targets, and that's what's interesting. I talk a lot about the team metaphor versus a family metaphor, political metaphor, populist metaphor, command and control metaphor. We talk about a team metaphor, and it's the one that works for building high-performing teams. And it gets rid of all of that noise that comes out of the political metaphors and family metaphors and those things that have a place, but they create so much distraction and so much resistance that it's not worth pursuing if you are intent on scaling and building a high-performance company. So the development plans, they are very prescriptive, and although we're using a team metaphor, it's not like there's a set of teams that are out to stop our every play that we face every week or every few days. There are no true opponents in the sense of a sporting event or a sporting team. There are opponents, obviously, and there are opponents who are trying to slow us down and they're trying to steal our secrets and make headway. But what I'm talking about is on a play-by-play basis, they don't even know your plays, let alone trying to stop them. So the development plans, as I said, are not one size fits all. If we were looking at teams, we know that there's some foot drills that mostly all the teams are going to do. There are some hand-eye coordination drills that most of the teams do. They may not all start doing them, but they see who's winning, and they look at who's winning and what they're using, and then they replicate that. These drills, you see them, if you go to team practices, even race car drivers are doing drills for hand-eye coordination and speed, things to speed up their neural pathways firing, as well as getting new neural pathways to fire together. You know, the neural pathways that fire together, wire together. So they're building these connections for performance on the track because we're measuring down to milliseconds now in terms of what it takes to win. So they're prescriptive, but they're grounded in principles that leaders can apply at any stage of business growth. And that in itself is a skill, to be able to develop development plans. It used to be an HR discipline, and there's been so much outsourcing now. In my opinion, a lot of times we've lost some of the development view that HR used to have. Some have no development plans at all because the HR is outsourced and that gap has not been filled. Now, over the next 4 weeks, I'll introduce frameworks and strategies to help you bridge the gap between theory and application. Whether you're using dynamic leadership or whether you just pull some things out of one of these books or I recommend or your favorite book, you can still apply this information I'm providing over the next 4 weeks relative to development plans. Today, I'll be talking about why development plans matter and how the cone of focus clarifies decision making. Next week, we'll get into identifying skill gaps and aligning development plans with your business's needs. Following weeks, we'll get into how to structure and implement effective development plans that actually drive results. In other words, you will get some skill development from watching these videos, and we'll do some illustrations, and I encourage you to try to teach it to someone else, explain it to someone else. This is how you start building. That's a form of deep practice, as a matter of fact. We think about deep practice as muscle memory and repeating a move, but deep practice also applies to thinking. It's the same neural pathways that fire a muscle are the same kind of neural pathways that fire our thinking. Now, you can make some distinctions there as you get really, really deep, but this is not a neuroscience conversation. The same kind of neural pathways, the same kind of myelin, the same kind of synapses and synaptogenesis that is at play with physical things that we've understood our whole lives is also at play with our thinking. You don't teach people and you don't change behavior by telling them or finding new ways to tell them. You do it by drilling, by deep practice, because if 95% of our lives are run by habit, what good is it going to do to impact the 5% with words? Now, we will use words in deep practice, but it's the drill that does it. The same way, whether it's volleyball or soccer, football, tennis, there's habits that players have, and coaches have to break those out of them, and they do it with deep practice. And once it's done, they could step away. They may have to do some tune-ups, but it's not like you have to keep doing that drill over and over and over. Once they get the new neural pathways firing, the old ones literally stop firing, which is synaptogenesis, and now they've got the new skill. And it happens, it's very, very much contained. You can do it in a weekend. For some skills, you can do it in an hour. You can do it in 5 minutes. Others might take longer. But that's part of the understanding of how to apply deep practice. So dynamic leadership is about equipping yourself and your team to succeed in an unpredictable world. The beauty of this approach is that you can apply it immediately from wherever you are and scale it to fit both frontline execution and C-suite strategy. So let's dive in. What I'm going to do first is talk about development plans in general so that we get a sense of what we're talking about and you have a picture. I'm going to talk about development plans in 3 levels. I talk about dynamic leadership being ideal for small businesses that are intent on growing and scaling, and I define small business in these terms as 400 employees or less. It's very flexible, but it has to do with the amount of revenue per employee. This is part of it. Revenue per employee increases exponentially somewhere after around 400 employees. Could happen before, could happen after, but you go from struggling to 2 and 3x revenue per employee. Now we have a bell curve. You clearly have the wings of that bell curve, but we're talking about over time. The other reason is that when you get much above 400, it can happen at 200. It can happen at 50 if you get investors or private equity involved. But once you have a board that's in place, that board has more say over what that leader can do. When you look at good to great, and they talk about the level 5 leadership, those leaders who met that level 5, the buck stopped with them. They had the say. Now, they may have answered to a board, but they had the freedom of action to run their deal. And so dynamic leadership can work for any kind of company, but the leader has to have the ability to run their deal. It's not by committee. You're running it with this one single vision, and this one person has that focus. And again, that's a skill. We were brought up to think that that's a special kind of person. Well, it was conditioned, maybe conditioned from 0 to 7, maybe reinforced from 8 to 19, locked in from 20 to 27 with the prefrontal cortex and the executive functions. But we can reset our conditioning. We can learn it if you have a big enough reason, and that's a big part of it. We have to have a big enough reason, and in the context of a company, it's the vision. So we're going to get to that. I want to just talk about a very simple example. So let's say that you want to try a new service. You see there's an opportunity in the marketplace. There's a gap that needs to be filled. You've uncovered some opportunities. Your customers told you something. And you decide that you want to take advantage of that gap, or at least you want to test it. You know who your core customer is. So all that stuff is done. We're not talking about a new business here. We're talking about an up and running company that you want to try we call it guerrilla works or skunk works, right? And so the first thing you have to do is envision it. So after envisioning it, then we're going to design. Now, after you design it, we have to build it, at least the prototype. And I'm talking about the prototype here, because this happens again at a bigger level once you've figured it out. In the book, Great by Choice, two things come out of it. Well, a lot comes out of it. One is the 20-mile march, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But the other one is simple, methodical, and consistent. So we want tight work. We want crisp and tight work. We don't want to be all over the place. And that in itself is a skill. But by having principles that we follow as an organization, it's going to help us tighten that. So we go from the prototype to the bigger project, and that bigger project might only deal with a few states, and then you roll it out to the country. That was certainly the case with insurance, because every state has different regulations. You have to be aware if you're in multi-states and especially multi-countries of being aware, but beyond the scope here, but you get the point. So we prototype and then we expand. He talks about in the book, Great by Choice, fire bullets, then cannons. And the idea here is that testing your range, your angle, your direction to hit the target. But rather than use cannonballs, which take more gunpowder, more costly, we're using bullets first and then cannons. Prototype would be like the bullets. And then you have cannons becoming the expansion. But even at the prototype, we're still going to follow something like a design, build, implement. We can have review, and I can start expanding this. So for example, in the building, we have to have some testing. And after implement, we have to assess and make corrections. And between design and build, we have to have iteration back to the leader. So I get all that. But if you look at this as a skill that every company needs, let's start there. So I talk a lot about VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And VUCA comes in all forms. The bottom line is this can be distracting to us, but if you take a company that is going along like in good to great and they break out, and this is the good to great companies, they broke out. Not only did they break out, they outperformed the other companies that kept going on. They outperformed them for 15 years. Now, when this happens, it's not like all of a sudden you just go straight up. We've seen that happen, and some of those companies go straight up, and then they go straight down. Not straight down, but you get the point. They crash. And they might, flash in the pan, and then they drop down. We also see some companies or some examples where they break out, and then there's these huge wild swings. We know that we have to go up and down, but there's these huge wild swings that just take the people all over the place. And then we have what I like to think of as we break out, but then we're going to have an adjustment period. We're going to run it out. That's the operational period. And then we'll probably have some innovation, make a pivot, and then we have some operation time. And this gets tighter and tighter. This breakout gets tighter and tighter because what we're doing is the innovation, operations. So this prototype is part of the innovating. We don't just wake up and know exactly what to do. We have an idea, and so now we're going to play it out. So what gets involved here? What do we have to do? Well, in the design, and this is the innovation part, we're going to have to do some research. We're going to have to do some skunk works, maybe using AI, maybe using some modeling, depending on what work you do. You're going to have to think about feasibility. Then we're going to have to start building it. Now, building it, you need to have some kind of website or some kind of vehicle. Could be a landing page on your website. It could be a separate website with the URL that you can test. We need to have some kind of a way to track. And this is in addition to whatever it is you're building. You're building a widget. You know how to do widgets. That's what you do. But in order to test whether or not this widget is going to work and whether or not it's worth investing in and how much of an investment is it worth considering, that widget, while it's going through this cycle, you're still having to do these other pieces, these wraparounds. And this exists no matter what you're doing, whether it's software development, whether it's vehicles, whether it's machinery. There's something that goes along in this area. And then we have the implementation, the testing and the implementation. And here's where this is design. You have to design this, the implementation. You don't just send it out there. You can, but it's not going to give you the feedback you want. We need change management, and we need to have some sort of an assessment system, because as you're testing, you can't just go out and fix every single thing because you create new problems. You have to have some way of triaging and assessments. And then we have the review. So we have measurement, you have KPIs, and you have to decide what you're not going to do and what you're going to add, right? So continuous improvement. And I'm just throwing this together as an example just to have a conversation about skills. We can approach this idea with looking at skills in different ways. We can say that there's formal education, formal development. For example, you can go Multipliers, the book, they have courses that you can take. You can go Myers-Briggs. There's the Franklin Covey Institute has courses and programs you can go to. Most of your universities have some kind of programs. So that's going to give you that broad awareness kind of development. That's important. Then we're going to have some application development in your company, some specific development within your company or industry, skills. And this is where we want to focus. You can outsource these, but only you know your company. And these internal skills, how do you know that when you say, I want you to go brainstorm something, that they know exactly what you mean and they're going to do it the way that you want? So now let's look at this from another perspective. We were talking about your purpose and your vision. And this is your direction. There's a cone of about 15 degrees on either side that we want to focus on. But for small businesses, we typically don't get involved in wanting to come up with the vision and the mission statement. That stuff doesn't lead to sales, and so we tend to put it off. And not only that, because of VUCA, it's very easy to want to wait until we have more clarity. Well, you know what? VUCA's not going down. There's going to be more and more and more. Just look at what's going on globally right now. We don't know what next year will bring. We do know that the next big thing will be bigger than the last big thing. You know, there's going to be hiccups along the way, but the next big thing will be really, really big. We have to be ready for that in a way that we're not prepared for that thing. This is not about prepping or being prepared. It's about being resourceful enough so that no matter what comes your way, you can handle it. So what you're going to be able to do is now pivot and innovate within this cone. And this helps us avoid the shiny things, and it helps us to stay steady in the face of threats. But how do you get there? If you were a large company who had a board, your board would force the conversation about a vision. They would force the conversation about mission. They would make sure you have those statements and you're communicating them. All of those things take away. And remember, we don't have, as small businesses, we don't have the revenue per employee to just throw people into a room and have them figure this stuff out. Every time you spend a moment on this, it feels like you're taking a moment away from sales. On the other hand, we know that there's got to be a place where sometimes draining the swamp becomes more important than fighting the alligators. You have to suck it up and drain the swamp, or you're going to be fighting alligators, for the rest of time. So there's that balance. And as small businesses, we tend to put off the draining the swamp. We fight the alligators and do a little draining along the way, but it's like being on the treadmill. With questions, feedback mechanisms, and questionnaires, assessments that you can do internally, and guided conversations, you can determine what you're not going to do. You can start right away by saying, what do you know you won't do? And this could be personal. As the leader, as the owner, you may decide that you do not want to go global. I'm making that up. Or that you do not want to resort to selling online, or that you do not want to have a sales force, whatever. You will not outsource HR, whatever it is, there's some things that you will not do. So you make that list of things you won't do. And then it's not just operating plan, it's also your business model. What are some operating things you won't do, and what are some business model things you won't do? As you get this list, it will inform a cone of what you won't do. And then as you shorten the time frame, you say, what will we not do in the next 5 years? What will we not do in the next year? And then by now you have a fairly good look at what you won't do. And then this can be filled in much more easily, because now you're saying, okay, so based on this, cones here, what are some likely things that are in there that, unless something really bad happens, we're not going to do it, but we'll reserve the right to come back and visit it. But what'll happen is it takes it out of play for your innovation. So this is a clock, 90 degrees from direction of travel. 1 o'clock is actually 30 degrees, as is 11. So what we're talking about is a cone that is essentially between 12 and 1 on one side and 11 and 12 on the other. And that's your cone. Figure out what's outside of it that you're not going to do. Now, when you're innovating, you're just innovating within this space. You're not trying every new thing. You're not chasing every new thing. This allows you to be the simple, methodical, and consistent. That's from Great by Choice, 20-Mile March, Great by Choice, Hedgehog Concept, Good to Great, and I'll throw in the flywheel. So now you can apply these without looking over your shoulder what's going on. Our opportunities and threats, they are coming at us so fast that if we react and change every single time, we're never going to get anything done. It's easier today than ever to ignore all of that and just stay consistent, because no matter what happens, you're going to be in a pretty good place. And I would also make the point about making sure you keep a strong balance sheet. I would be prioritizing a healthy, strong balance sheet, because when big things happen, there's opportunities. So you get the idea. This is how you're going to know where you can pivot, and everybody on the team should know what this looks like. Once you figure it out, I would say you figure it out with your senior leadership team, because where I've mentioned the different kinds of development plans we're going to talk about, and I said internal skills, there's also, we've got leadership, sales, and project. Just as some basic ones, we're going to have leadership skills, sales skills, and project skills that you need that capability on your team. You don't want to have to create a whole set of outreach and hire people and go and Upwork and Fiverr, which are fine. It's fine to use those, but to come from idea to market, you can do this. We need to be able to do this in hours, not weeks. And the other thing is, there should be a common language across these. They're leadership best practices. Why should we be messing around with things that are non-starters? Sales, there should be a common language. Your executives, in my opinion, should know how to sell. It doesn't mean they're going to be as good as the people on the frontline sales, but we don't need to get marketing and sales involved and come up with the new scripts and all that just to test this product, when you can have a person on your team know enough about sales that they can go out and sell the thing themselves, or somebody on their team can go out and sell it themselves. Maybe not at a 100% level, but certainly at an 80% level, which is enough to get the feedback. And then you have to have the basic project skills. Obviously, you'll be hiring probably a project manager or using a project manager once the work gets underway. But to do the initial work, somebody who just has a working knowledge of getting from A to Z in terms of a prototype. So all of those skills you want to have, and you can do this in laps. So, you don't have to become expert at every single thing. But I do think we want to have common language. I do think we want to have specific protocols, methodologies, etc. So you don't have one person running out of a family metaphor and another person trying to run out of a command and control metaphor. And when you bring somebody in, now you have a game plan. So what we'll be talking about is the person comes into the organization. There's things that they have to know within the first 3 months. Now, most of you probably have something along these lines already, because there's requirements. There are HR-related requirements, whether it's harassment, violence in the workplace, these kinds of topics have to be covered, compliance. But what do you require? There's some things that have to happen in the first 6 months. This is true for brand new employees, and it's true for senior people who have experience. They still have to learn your organization. They have to learn your playbook. They have to learn your language. They may have the skills. So while the new person may have multiple touches in that first 3 months, for the experienced person, they may be just 2 touches, one at 3 months, one at 6 months, and there's some skills that they've got to cover. Some of these skills can be done online. To get you thinking, shouldn't your executive team, at least half your executive team, your Senate leadership team, be able to speak on camera effectively at a moment's notice? Or you want to test something, or you have to get out ahead of some messaging? You don't have to wait until you get to a studio. There should be somebody who understands how to set up a pop-up studio really quick, and you should have multiple people on your team who can speak on camera. That should already be done. That's a skill that people can learn. You need to brainstorm to figure out where we should go, what direction we should take. Brainstorming is a skill. Now, it's a simple one. You may think everyone knows how to brainstorm, but when it comes to facilitating a powerful brainstorming session, there's an effective way, and I can tell you some ineffective ways. Being able to write copy. How about using artificial intelligence? Everybody can say, I know how to use artificial intelligence, but there are effective ways to use it, and there are ways that are not so effective. And you want to make sure that the people know those effective, the best practices. And you can do each one of these as deep practice skills. That's what we'll talk about in the next 3, is identifying the gaps and then applying deep practice for the skills. And then we have the 2 years. And the 2 years, that's my going in position where the development plan stops. But even for an executive, if you follow the belief that says everybody you hire, you should be hiring them to go 2 or 3 levels from where you hire them, you can see what can fill in this 2-year development plan. You're getting them ready for these other positions, and it'll morph and change. It'll adjust. That's why you have checkpoint meetings and all that. But I think that with a half-hour conversation, we can probably come up with 2 to 3 things in the 3 months, 2 to 3 more things for the 6 months, and another 3 or 4 things for 24 months, and be a half-hour conversation. And then you can flesh it out from there. So I'm going to leave it there. We'll start next week. We'll talk about the identifying priorities and connecting those to gaps so that you can begin to think about what those development plans look like. But I want to focus this on your playbook, what you know as a leader, and then looking at ways to do testing. I'll also incorporate why and how we're applying good to great and great by choice. There are tools that you have, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So that's my story. Sticking to it, and we'll see you over the next 3 weeks with these same topics.